It started with a phone call. It ended with a body behind a dumpster. And for months, no one knew why.
Being brought in right there. That is Brian Myers. He was convicted back on May 1st he was convicted of murder, felony assault, also having a weapon as a felon. He was convicted in the murder of 39-year-old Melissa Millspaugh. She was killed back on October 7th of 2025. Police were called around 1:45 to the area of 127 and Buckeye Road. That's in the Buckeye Shaker neighborhood. They had a report of a woman who had been shot. When they got there, the woman was behind a dumpster and she was dead. And the subsequent trial by jury found that Mr. Myers is guilty, and today is sentencing day. Let's take you live into the court.
Some stories begin with a phone call. A quiet Tuesday afternoon. Streets still carrying the last warmth of an October sun. People going about their lives, buying groceries, picking up children, sitting on porches, watching the world move slowly by. And somewhere in the middle of all that ordinary life, a single moment changed everything. On October 7th, 2025, that moment happened in Cleveland, Ohio. A gunshot broke the afternoon silence near Buckeye Road on the city's east side. Within minutes, police radios crackled to life. Officers were sent to investigate reports of a woman who had possibly been shot behind a row of commercial buildings near East 128th Street. To the officers driving toward the scene, it may have sounded like many calls they had answered before. A report, an address, a reason to move fast. But this one was different. Behind a dumpster, tucked away from the road, hidden from passing cars and pedestrians, officers found 39-year-old Melissa Millspaugh. She had been shot. By the time medical teams arrived and knelt beside her, there was nothing more anyone could do. Melissa was pronounced dead right there, in that alley on a Tuesday afternoon in October. She never made it home. Melissa Millspaugh was someone's mother, someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's friend. To the people who loved her, she was not a name in a police report or a case number filed in a courthouse. She was a real woman, warm, familiar, part of someone's everyday life. The kind of person whose absence leaves a shape in the room that never quite goes away. When word of her death reached her family, the grief came quickly and heavily. People who had spoken to her, laughed with her, shared meals with her, they were now being asked to plan a funeral instead. That kind of loss does not fade easily. It settles deep, and it stays. While her family tried to find their footing in those early hours, investigators were already beginning their work. Detectives walked the alleyway carefully, studying every detail of the scene. They photographed the area around the dumpster, searched for shell casings, collected physical evidence, and worked to understand exactly what had happened in those final moments of Melissa's life. The process was slow and deliberate. Grief moves fast. Evidence must be handled gently. Almost from the very beginning, witnesses came forward. Several people who had been nearby told police they had seen something important, something that would quietly shape the entire investigation that followed. They described watching Melissa walk behind the dumpster area with a man, just moments before a single gunshot rang out. And then, according to those who were watching, only one person walked away. That man was identified as 48-year-old Brian Myers. Detectives moved quickly. On the same day Melissa was found, that same October afternoon, police located and arrested Myers. The investigation had barely begun before a suspect was in custody. But having a suspect is only the starting point. Prosecutors still needed to build a case. And so the real work began. Over the days and weeks that followed, investigators worked carefully to reconstruct the hours leading up to the shooting. They reviewed surveillance footage pulled from nearby businesses and traffic cameras, watching video frame by frame for any glimpse of Melissa or Myers before the shooting. They examined cell phone records and location data, tracing the digital footprints both individuals had left throughout the day. They interviewed witnesses separately, comparing their accounts, looking for consistency, searching for truth buried inside memory. One question rose above all the others during those early weeks of investigation. How did Melissa and Brian Myers end up together in that alleyway? Public records connected to the case did not fully answer that question. How long they had known one another was not made entirely clear. Whether the meeting that afternoon had been arranged or happened by chance was never definitively explained to the public. That uncertainty lingered quietly at the edges of the case, a question without a clear answer. What investigators did know was where the evidence pointed. Forensic specialists examined the ballistics recovered near the dumpster. The medical examiner's office completed an autopsy and made it official. Melissa Millspaugh's death was a homicide caused by a gunshot wound. There was no ambiguity. Her death had not been an accident. Prosecutors moved forward. They filed charges against Myers that included murder, felonious assault, and carrying a weapon while legally prohibited from doing so, a charge that applies when someone who is not allowed to own or carry a firearm is found to have one. In late October 2025, the case was brought before a Cuyahoga County grand jury. Investigators and prosecutors laid out what they had gathered: the witness accounts, the surveillance footage, the forensic findings, the timeline of events. The grand jury reviewed everything carefully, and then they made their decision. Brian Myers was formally indicted on multiple charges connected to Melissa's death. With that, the case moved deeper into the court system. Hearings were scheduled. Attorneys on both sides began preparing their arguments. The long process of pursuing justice, methodical, sometimes slow, always heavy, was now officially underway. Over the months that followed, both sides built their cases. Prosecutors worked to organize their witnesses, finalize their forensic presentations, and create a clear, coherent picture of what they believed had happened that October afternoon. Defense attorneys studied the evidence, questioned the timeline, and examined every corner of the investigation for anything that might support a different conclusion. It is the nature of the legal process to be thorough. Each piece of evidence examined carefully. Each witness statement considered. Each question asked more than once. For Melissa's family, those months were not abstract legal proceedings. They were months without her. Months of grief tucked alongside the waiting for a trial, waiting for answers, waiting for some form of resolution that could never fully undo what had been lost. In 2026, the murder trial of Brian Myers began. Jurors took their seats and listened as prosecutors opened with a straightforward account of what they believed had occurred. Brian Myers walked behind that dumpster with Melissa Millspaugh on the afternoon of October 7, 2025, and he shot her. Witness after witness took the stand. They described hearing the gunshot. They described seeing Myers leave the area alone. Police officers testified about their arrival at the scene and the investigation that followed. Forensic experts explained the physical evidence, the ballistics, the autopsy results, the findings collected from that alleyway on Buckeye Road. The prosecution's argument was built carefully, piece by piece. Witness testimony, surveillance footage, forensic science, timeline reconstruction, all of it pointing in the same direction. Defense attorneys worked to challenge that picture. They questioned whether witness memories were fully reliable. They highlighted gaps in the evidence, moments during the shooting itself that no camera had captured, no witness had seen directly. They asked the jury to look carefully at what had not been proven, not just what had been presented. It is how the system works, and it matters that it works that way. But when the testimony was finished and the courtroom fell quiet for deliberation, the jury had heard everything. They reviewed it all. They weighed it. On May 1st, 2026, nearly 7 months after Melissa Millspaugh was found behind that dumpster, the jury delivered its verdict.
Guilty.
Brian Myers was found guilty of murder, guilty of felonious assault, guilty of carrying a weapon while prohibited from doing so. The words landed heavy in that courtroom. For Melissa's family, seated and listening, there is no verdict that erases grief. No ruling that returns someone to the people who loved them. But a verdict like this carries something real, an acknowledgement, made formally and publicly, that what happened to Melissa was wrong, that her life mattered, and that someone would be held responsible for taking it. That is not nothing. That is not a small thing. Following the verdict, sentencing proceedings were set. Prosecutors prepared to seek a significant prison term. Defense attorneys retained the right to file appeals. The legal process, as it always does, continued moving forward. Some questions about this case remain unanswered, at least publicly. The exact nature of the relationship between Melissa and Brian Myers was never fully explained. The precise motive for the shooting was never made entirely clear in the public record. What was said or done in those final moments behind the dumpster may never be fully known. What is known is this: a woman named Melissa Millspaugh was alive on the morning of October 7, 2025. She had children who needed her, family who loved her, and a life that held ordinary, irreplaceable value. By that afternoon, she was gone. A single investigation, built slowly and carefully from witness accounts, security cameras, forensic science, and months of legal proceedings, eventually led to a courtroom and then to a verdict. It began with a phone call. It ended with 12 people deciding that what the evidence showed was enough. And somewhere in between, a family learned to carry the weight of losing someone who should still be here. If this story stayed with you, if it made you stop, think, or feel something, you are not alone. These are real lives, real losses, and real families still carrying this weight long after the headlines move on. If you found value in the way this story was told, please consider subscribing so you never miss another. New stories are shared here every single day, each one told with the same care, the same patience, and the same quiet respect for the people at the center of them. And if you know someone who needs a space to slow down, to think, and to feel, share this video with them. Sometimes the most meaningful thing we can do is simply pass along a story that matters. Come back tomorrow. There is always another story worth telling.